It's a new chapter for the New England Patriots, a new head coach, a new quarterback, and I speak about all of it with Phil Perry from NBC Sports Boston in this episode of Iggy Sports Talk.
Hold up. Wait until the whole team show up.
Welcome back into Iggy Sports Talk. I'm your host, Jake Nazuski, or Iggy for short. I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode. But football is finally back, and there's a new chapter on the horizon in New England for the Patriots. With Bill Belichick out, Mac Jones out, and Jerod Mayo, the new head coach, and Drake Maye, potentially the new starting quarterback. There's a lot of things to be excited about with the Patriots this upcoming season. And I brought on NBC Sports Boston Patriots reporter Phil Perry to speak about everything, like who will be the starting quarterback in week one, what does the new vibe look like with Jerod Mayo at the helm, and also we predict where Bill Belichick could potentially coach next season. Now, let's get into my conversation with Phil. So how are we doing today, Phil? It's great having you on. It's a new chapter in New England, new head coach, new regime, new quarterback maybe too, but how have you been doing?
Yeah, Jake, thanks for asking, man. It's been a fun summer tracking this team and this regime and how they handle things and all the differences between what we were used to for so long and how they're doing things now. This is I think my 12th camp. So it's been a long time getting used to things a certain way. And so some things have been different. Other things have been similar. Other things have been different in a way that I didn't expect. You know, I think Jerod Mayo's had an interesting camp in that, on the one hand, while he is, I think in some ways, a player's coach, he's been a little bit tougher than a lot of people expected on the players during camp, myself included. So anyway, that's just one example of all the changes happening now and how they're sort of keeping us on our toes over there.
So, I mean, we've seen the vibe change a little bit just from like what we've been hearing on the outside in terms of Mayo. Obviously, with Bill, it was all business all the time. And we heard from, Brady and Gronk after their careers, that was sort of like a military type feeling. But especially when Mayo first got in the building, we heard of, basketball hoops going in some of the meeting rooms and the locker room, trying to add more competition and maybe a little bit less of that like military type structure. So in terms of those, differences or maybe some of the same things that you've seen, how was sort of the vibe maybe different from what we saw from Bill for 20 years?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because on the one hand, you have seen like those types of things that you described. There's a player's lounge where they've got, an Xbox and a PlayStation and beanbag chairs and just an area for guys to relax and feel somewhat at home, but still be at the facility. That was important, I know, to Jerod Mayo to make sure that was in there. He'd been very open about how he wants to handle personal relationships with players. He wants them to know that he cares about them before really getting into the nitty-gritty of coaching and not only them but their families. And so that matters to him. And I know one of the reasons he feels that way is because for today's player, that means more to them than it did even when he was coming into the league. And then once you get some buy-in from those players by showing them that you care in that way, then you can push him hard. And that's been the surprising part to me. So we knew he was going to try to develop these relationships with players. The way he had really is a defensive assistant, right? He's got an advantage in that he has a built-in relationship with a lot of these guys already. And a lot of them are already bought into who he is as a coach, and they'll already run through a wall for him. But he's got to get the whole team bought into this whole idea. And I think he feels as though he's started to do that because training camp this year has been objectively, I would say, harder on players physically than maybe any that I've covered. And I say that hesitantly because we know Bill Belichick and we know his reputation and he drives players hard. There's no doubt about it. And the conditioning on the back hill, that was a Bill thing. And, it was one of the reasons why I remember writing about this. And then later that year, they ended up in the Super Bowl and they credited the hill for being able to come back against the Falcons and play basically 100 plays offensively because they felt like they wore the Falcons down and their conditioning was better. They're still doing that stuff. And not only are they still doing the Bill stuff, but they're doing more. They had a stretch of really, I would say, hot practices. And remember, the practices were pushed back in terms of the time. So it wasn't like a 9 a.m. start time to practice now. It was 11 a.m. and going through the middle of the day, 2 hours. And it was at times, heat index of about 100 with the humidity. And they still did. I believe there was a stretch where they did 7 of 8 practices in full pads. And not only did they do that, but they did something I hadn't seen Bill Belichick do in maybe 10 years, which is tackle to the ground, which sounds like football. It doesn't sound like the biggest deal in the world. But that was not happening in New England. Maybe at the goal line occasionally would Bill Belichick have, ball carries that are actually taken to the ground, but they were doing this out in the middle of the field, and it led to some big hits, some important players taking big hits. You could argue not maybe the smartest thing in the world, but inarguably a more physical camp, in my opinion. And so little things like that would suggest, okay, he might be a player's coach in some ways, but in other ways, that title is not really going to fit. He's going to push them in some ways as hard as they were pushed under Bill Belichick.
And, I think you would agree with this, that it definitely helped in terms of the transition, that he was already there, kind of like you mentioned. Like, these players already know who he is, rather than somebody just coming in, changing things up, kind of like you're mentioning that he is, and being like, who the heck is this guy to change all this stuff. But I mean, the thing that came into my mind, especially with the recent trade of Judon, is sort of that leadership within the locker room. And, obviously new coaches and sort of a new type of feeling around the team. Who have you seen in camp so far kind of take that leadership charge, especially now with Judon out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Judon was a leader in his own way. He hadn't been a captain, but he was one of these guys who was willing to help younger players, and that younger players looked up to because he had had a good career. And, that's for a lot of guys who are hoping to set their families up with generational wealth and have great careers. Like, you don't have to be a quote unquote leader or a captain. If you've had a good career, you are a de facto leader, like it or not. And that was sort of Judon, I think. And with him gone, I would still expect guys like Jonathan Jones. Let's just talk about the defensive side of things. Jonathan Jones in the secondary, Kyle Duggar in the secondary, Juwan Bentley really overall for the defense, I would say, is the leader for the defense. When they were doing the other day, I don't know how closely you've been following practice, but they did their little slip and slide ball security drill the other day where they hose down the field. It's all muddy. It's all wet. It had actually just rained too. So it was really soft, like soupy conditions out there. And the two guys holding the hoses, the two veterans holding the hoses as these rookies and second-year players and first-year coaches, Mayo included, went through this and had to dive on top of these footballs. The two guys holding the hoses were David Andrews and Juwan Bentley, which I think tells you where Bentley sits just in terms of the hierarchy defensively, leadership-wise. So Dietrich Wise, I would say, up front for those guys has been a leader. Devon Godshaw too. So it's not a lot of change, honestly, on that end. I think what they're really lacking with Judon going is blue chip veteran talent, because now not only is Judon gone, but Christian Barmore is dealing with blood clots. And so, if you're looking for certain players to make big plays in key moments, it's going to have to come from guys who haven't done a lot of that over the course of their careers. Maybe it's a Keon White who gets more opportunities with Judon gone. Maybe it's somebody like O'Shane Zimenez, who is a free agent played 5 years with the Giants and has had a really good camp. He's been banged up lately, but has played well. And I think he's going to get some opportunities this year to get after the quarterback. So they're just going to need it to be sort of a joint group effort to pick up the slack with Judon gone.
That makes sense. And, we're mainly talking about the leadership on the field, but I also think it helps with guys like Dante Hightower now being a coach, as well as, Matthew Slater, who were both big leaders in the locker room, for the past 5 to 10 years. And curious how you've seen both of those guys sort of transition into those coaching roles.
Yeah, I think those guys will really help the young players, especially figure out what it means to be a pro. When I look at those two names that you mentioned, those are ultimate pros. I mean, love football, but also understand that this is a job and that you have to constantly be trying to improve. And so, nobody was in the gym more than Matthew Slater. Nobody getting worked on more, especially later in his career, than Matthew Slater, just to make sure he could maintain the way he needed to. I think about Hightower and all the injuries he had to come back from, and still was able to, when healthy, play and get better as the year went on, and had his best games in Super Bowls. So that to me that's about being a professional and understanding, what it takes. And so those guys would be the first to tell you that the players are really the ones who have to be the leaders in the locker room. It can't be up to them.
Right.
but they'll provide a daily reminder, not only through their coaching, but just their presence. And with those players understanding who they were as players, a reminder of how to do things the right way. And that could pay huge dividends, especially for the young guys down the line.
Yeah, I completely agree. And honestly, I don't remember sort of having as many former players who, with Hightower and Slater, who aren't that far removed from being on the field, really around such a young team like the Patriots. And I think that's what's cool about this new vibe, is having all those younger players who have that, not only player relationship, but understand where those players were in their exact shoes. But, also looking as well as, like a guy named Jacoby Brissett, who's, been a leader throughout his career. And, I always go back to him with the Browns, sort of filling in for Deshaun Watson and really bringing that whole locker room together. But how have you really seen him be a leader and really have him help out the rookies like Drake Maye or Joe Milton?
Yeah, we see it every day. I mean, he's talking to these guys in between series, especially the two young quarterbacks. But even with Bailey Zappi, you see them with sort of, playful competitions before the practice really gets started in earnest, and they're going through their positional drills. They're trying to beat each other. And that to me is a form of leadership, being competitive and wanting to win in those spots. I think is a way of being competitive and showing your leadership without overdoing it, right? He's not shutting these guys out, which I think is key. I think it's one of the reasons he's here. They knew they didn't know it was gonna be Drake Maye, but they knew they're gonna have a young quarterback in-house that was gonna need some time to develop. And Jacoby Brissett's been described to me as a guy with almost no ego. And to have the experience that he has and the willingness to share what he knows with the other guys in that room, that's hugely, hugely valuable. I mean, we've seen him not only coach up the quarterbacks, but there have been periods of practice, Jake, where he's taking the quarterbacks, the receivers, and the tight ends, and they're down near the goal line, and he's showing them the details of route running and how he wants certain routes to be run, or how in this system, which he knows well, having spent time with Alex Van Pelt before, how they're expected to run their routes and the little important details that happen down there in the red zone. Now, didn't help anybody when he threw a pick in the red zone the other day in that preseason game against the Eagles, but it just goes to show to have almost 20 guys there hanging on his every word as he's basically coaching them on the field in the middle of a practice, what kind of respect he has. And that has been a net positive. There's no question about it. One interesting aspect of Brissett and his leadership has been that you have seen a lot of players sort of defer to him, which makes sense, right? He gets every first team rep in practice. He's looking like the starting quarterback. He's a veteran. He knows how to run this offense. He's helping teach guys this offense. I think when it comes to Drake Maye, one of the things the coaching staff wants to see and has seen more of lately from the rookie is a little more assertiveness in terms of attack this like it's a competition, attack it like it's your job, like you want the job. It's hard. He's 21 years old. He's still learning. He doesn't want to be telling people what to do before he even knows how to do things himself. So I think he's approached it the right way, but there is a fine line between knowing your place as a rookie and also understanding you're the face of the franchise. And this is going to be your job, if not in the not in the immediate future, in the relatively not too distant future. Yeah. And so you've got to be able to show guys that, you want this team to be yours. You don't want to step on Jacoby's toes, but push him a little bit. Put the pressure on him to make sure that he is better than you. And I think we've seen a little bit more of that, a little more confidence, a little more assertiveness, not quite as much deference in the last week and a half or so from Drake Maye.
You brought up the starting quarterback conversation, and as most head coaches do around this time, they're not going to sort of show their cards, and that's kind of what we've seen Jerod Mayo do so far, of saying, I'll let you guys know when I know the starting quarterback. But I think in most people's mind, when Drake was ultimately drafted, at least in my mind, especially with Brissett already on the roster, I thought they were probably going to go the Mahomes route of have him sit for a majority of the season, sort of develop, learn from Brissett. And we sort of heard at times a little bit of a different tone throughout training camp about maybe going that route. I'm curious, how you think it'll all shake out for week one. And let's say Maye doesn't start week one. Could you see him potentially start this season, and maybe what week?
I could definitely see him starting this season. I think it's going to be sooner rather than later if things continue on the trajectory they've been on, again, the last 2 weeks or so, because it hasn't just been that Drake Maye looks more assertive, more decisive in the pocket, more confident in terms of understanding his reads and where to go with the football. When he was really, when it was feeling like he was pretty up and down day to day early in camp, there was just a lot of indecision behind center. There was a lot of pumping of the football, and last second he'd squeeze it and hold on to it and try to find another player, but then the timing of the play would all be screwy, and he might end up making a bad play. You're not really seeing that anymore, which is a great thing for the Patriots. And if that continues, if he's able to maintain this trajectory, it's going to be hard to keep him off the field, because physically already he's a better quarterback than Jacoby Brissett. He's more mobile. He's more explosive in the pocket. So when there are muddy pockets, I think he's going to have a better chance to navigate those. His arm's better. He's got a better ability to throw off platform, Jake. So, the offensive line looks like it could have another rough year this year. These guys are going to be under pressure. And to me, there's no question which quarterback is going to be better able to make something out of nothing between these two. And it's Drake Maye. And so if you're Jerod Mayo and you've been saying very consistently, hey, this is a competition, the better player is going to play. It's not about the situation. It's not about the offensive line being ready for rookie quarterbacks. It's not about the receivers. It's not about anything else. We're looking at all these positions, best player plays. And that's the culture and that's the standard they want to set. If that's the case, I could see Drake Maye starting maybe not week 1, unless Jacoby Brissett really has sort of a disastrous week here leading up to the final preseason game. And then maybe even a disastrous preseason game. I mean, that's worst case scenario for the Patriots. I think in their heart of hearts, they want to and expect, but really want Jacoby Brissett to take the job and be good enough that there is no question in anybody's mind he should be the starter. But it would not surprise me if in practice we get to a point midway through the season, maybe even not quite that far. Maybe it's week 5, week 6, and everybody knows. Right. That's where your hand gets forced as a coaching staff or as a front office. Once everybody knows, players included, who the best player is, then you kind of have to go with him, because the other players on the roster, Jabril Peppers, do you think Jabril Peppers cares about Drake Maye's long-term development, or Devon Godshaw or Dietrich Wise? Like, no, these guys are out there. They want to be put in the best possible situation to make themselves look their best. And they want to try to win games. And that means getting the most important position on the field taken care of, meaning the best player at that position needs to play. So if it becomes clear and obvious in practice that, hey, the guy who's actually running the scout team is better than the guy who's running our starting offense, then you have to make the switch. And it wouldn't stun me if, based on some combination of Drake Maye's performance in practice and Jacoby Brissett's play in regular season games, if a month or so into the season, we see Drake Maye as the starter.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised with that either. And it's interesting because we saw a similar sort of development happen, just 3 or 4 years ago with Mac Jones and Cam Newton. And even those are two completely different players. And there's some different coaches right now with the Patriots. Do you think that maybe they're looking at that situation a tiny bit, how it all played out, and maybe trying to be a little bit of a swifter transition for Maye from college to the NFL?
I don't know how much they're using the Mac Jones example, just because he was coming from a more polished offensive system, which made his transition easier. He was probably more pro-ready. Obviously, he didn't have the physical skills that Drake Maye had, but he was probably more pro-ready just in terms of his mechanics and his reads and his understanding of defenses coming from the SEC, and the coaching that he got. So it was a little bit different. And I would also say this, like, Mac Jones, it became clear quickly. I would say first signs were in the spring that if the Patriots wanted to pass the football, and we know what kind of league it is now, where it's a passing league, it's a quarterback-driven league. But if that's what the Patriots wanted to do, Mac Jones was going to give them the best opportunity to succeed in those situations. If they want to do the quarterback run game thing, obviously Cam Newton's the guy, right? If that's the kind of team you want to be. But they made the prudent decision to go with the guy who was far and away the better passer almost as soon as he got to Foxborough. Now, what I would say is this: when you're comparing the situations, that's interesting to me is Mac Jones really wasn't given the starting job until Cam Newton started to miss time. He had to miss time because of COVID protocols, essentially, and was forced to stay away from the facility. And that allowed Mac Jones to get all the first team reps. Whereas before they had been sort of splitting and mixing and matching. He got them all and he played well. And that's when everybody realized that he should be the guy. And here this year, Drake Maye really hasn't gotten any first team reps. A couple of quick ones on Saturday, but it was in a practice period that was really a walkthrough. So those were his first snaps from David Andrews in any practice this summer. And that's an indication of the first team offensive line is out there. They're mixing and matching at some other positions, but as long as Andrews is out there, that's first team. So he hasn't really had that opportunity that Mac Jones had. If he did, Jake, if he was playing behind the first team offensive line, they were somehow splitting those all summer, I wouldn't be shocked if we're all sitting here right now saying Drake Maye should be the week 1 starting quarterback, because the second line has been so bad that it's been hard to even get a gauge of what kind of player Drake Maye is at times. He can't, the ball's being snapped down around his ankles. He has to pick that, throws off the timing of the play. He has to find it, pick it up, start to survey the field. And within a half second, there's somebody in his face because they blew a block up front. They didn't even try to block the guy. He just came through untouched. There were so many reps like that he just had days of practice to me that felt wasted almost because the line couldn't protect for him. So maybe as we go through this last week of the summer and we get into the regular season, it's hard to get starter reps for anybody other than the starter. But if they're able to somehow do that, maybe it's in this preseason game. Maybe you give him enough reps with that first team offensive line in this game. And if he looks great, maybe that's enough to get a little bit of movement on the depth chart. I'm not necessarily anticipating that'll be the case right now.
That makes sense. We know the fans would love that. We heard the cheers when he first came out and everything like that, and you get to see the glimpse of the future. But speaking about that Mac Jones and Cam Newton situation, the guy who made that decision, last thing for you is Bill Belichick, just parted ways with the Patriots, now doing kind of like every single media thing under the sun this season. But Tom Pelissero did say that he is interested in coaching next season. And, we are at the beginning of the season. We don't know sort of how these teams and these records are going to kind of shake out at the end of it. But where could you potentially see Bill Belichick land at the beginning of next season? In my mind, some of the ones, Cowboys, Jets, Giants, something like that. But where do you think?
Yeah, you mentioned 2 teams there from the NFC East. I'll mention a third in the Philadelphia Eagles. And those teams, to me, and their current head coaches need to watch out for Bill Belichick. That's what I would say if I had to sort of forecast where he might end up next year. All 3 of those teams have expectations coming on them from ownership right now, and only one of them can win the division, right? So maybe you assume that that person is safe, and then maybe even there's a wild card team in there that ends up having a pretty good record, and maybe that coach is safe too. Although I would say for a team like the Eagles, if they end up as a wild card at 9-7 or something in their first round exit, that's a change I could totally see them making. Yeah. All 3 of those teams are not going to have the same head coach next year. I think all 3 would be attractive spots for Bill Belichick to land for different reasons. Dallas and Philly because of the rosters, and those are well thought of franchises, and those are management groups I would say that Belichick could work with. He's been on the record saying he gets along with the Jones family just fine. In terms of the Eagles, like Howie Roseman, we know runs the football operation there. We know they have a good relationship, Roseman and Belichick do. Would Eagles ownership want Bill Belichick? That I don't know. The Giants, though, to me, because they're most likely to not have a great record, and most likely to be needing a new coach next year. Even though I think Brian Daboll's a good coach, I just think that's a rough situation talent-wise that he's got to deal with there right now. That to me feels like the best chance for Belichick to find a team that he likes in an area that he likes for an organization that he has professed his love for in the past. To be able to sort of rekindle that Giants Belichick thing to finish off his career.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he has the green light to go, if they have a high end pick next year, maybe you're starting over with a new quarterback, but maybe he feels like there's enough talent, some of those other spots, especially on the defensive line. It feels like that thing is tailor made for Bill Belichick. They have some real talent up front. The Giants do. If I had to pick one team, I think my team would be the Giants, but I would say any of those three NFC East teams would have to be in play.
Yeah, it's good. It's going to be really fun to see where the cutoff sleeves ultimately ends up, and where he's able to get that wins record for head coaches. But really appreciate you coming on, Phil. Thank you so much for taking the time and giving your insight. And for anybody that wants to check out your stuff or check out your podcast at NBC Sports Boston, where can they find all that?
Yeah, you can find all of my work really on Twitter or X at Phil A. Perry, Patriots Talk Podcast, Next Talk Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll have Patriots coverage for you every single night. Not only an early edition in Boston Sports Tonight, but our football shows are about to kick off, which we're really excited about. So, we'll have the breakdown again this year with myself and Ted Johnson every Monday, looking at the biggest plays from the previous weekend's game. But Quick Slants is back again this year. We're going to have some new football voices, which I'm really excited for people to hear from. So it's going to be a fun year over at NBC Sports Boston.
Awesome. Can't wait to tune in, and football's finally back. Let's go. I hope that you did enjoy my conversation with Phil, and you're really excited for this upcoming Patriots season. Now, they may not have the best record, but there's a lot of things to be looking forward to with this team. I think it's really interesting with all the former players who are now on the coaching staff being able to give that sort of vibe of understanding what those players on the field are going through, because they've been there before. And a lot of these guys like Jerod Mayo, Matthew Slater, and Dante Hightower were really successful with New England, and they understand what it means to win. So it'll be really interesting to see how the whole team sort of shakes out, as well as what happens at the quarterback position. Will we see Jacoby Brissett start for week 1, or will it be Drake Maye? And if it isn't Maye, when will he ultimately start this season? But I hope that you got a lot of your questions answered regarding the team with my conversation with Phil. And if you want to keep up to date with everything surrounding sports, as well as hear interesting sports stories from people who are speaking about the deeper aspects of sports, make sure to follow Iggy Sports Talk over on Instagram at Iggy Sports Talk. And if you want to be notified with any episode that comes out on YouTube or whatever audio platform that you normally listen to, like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or even Spotify, make sure to subscribe over there. But I greatly appreciate you tuning in. I'll see you and talk to you next time. Peace.